You feed $100 cash into a Bitcoin ATM. The screen confirms the transaction. You walk away with somewhere between $75 and $87 worth of Bitcoin. You knew the rate going in. It was right there on the screen. And yet there's a moment standing there with your receipt where your brain does the math and goes, "That's insane. I just lost almost a quarter of my money in about 4 seconds." You're not wrong to feel that. Most Bitcoin ATMs charge fees ranging from 10% to 25%, and some run even higher than that. Compare that to an online exchange, where you might pay under 1%, and the gap looks borderline criminal. But here's what almost nobody explains while you're standing at that machine, cash already inserted. That markup isn't pure profit, sitting in some operator's pocket. Most of it is something else entirely. And once you see the actual breakdown, the fee stops looking insane and starts looking like the receipt for an entire hidden industry built around one simple problem: getting cash into crypto without a bank account. What's actually inside? That fee-1 Bitcoin ATM operator, Byte Federal, published an unusually transparent breakdown of exactly where a typical fee goes. On a machine charging 16%, roughly 84% of that fee covers the actual cost of procuring the Bitcoin itself. The remaining portion splits between cash logistics, host location fees, hardware and operations, and compliance and regulation, with only a sliver left over as the actual margin that keeps the business running. Read that again. Of that 16% fee, the company says only about 1.4 percentage points represents genuine profit. Everything else is the literal cost of running the machine. That doesn't mean every operator runs that lean. Fee structures vary a lot, and plenty of machines sit at the higher end of the range purely because they can get away with it in a low competition spot. But it does mean the headline number you see isn't simply greed, the percentage. It's a stack of real costs layered on top of each other, and most of them have nothing to do with Bitcoin at all. Reason 1. Compliance is brutally expensive. Here's the cost most people never think about. A Bitcoin ATM operator has to follow the exact same anti-money laundering rules as a bank, but without a bank scale to spread that cost across. Industry estimates show a mid-sized operator may spend anywhere from $500,000 to $2,000 each year on Bank Secrecy Act and anti-money laundering controls alone, covering compliance staff, monitoring software, legal review, examination prep, and ongoing case management. State licensing on top of that can add another $250,000 to $350,000 in initial setup costs before the company earns a single dollar of margin. This is why a Bitcoin ATM costs you so much more than swiping a card at a regular ATM. Bitcoin ATMs are still relatively new, which means they're subject to far more compliance regulation than established banks that have had decades to build out infrastructure at massive scale. Every single transaction has to be monitored, documented, and reportable, and that overhead gets baked directly into your fee. Reason 2. Moving physical cash is genuinely expensive. A Bitcoin ATM at its core is a machine that has to physically eat your cash and keep it safe until someone collects it. That means armored transport and secure cash management on top of the machine, hardware itself, electricity, rent on the physical location, and round-the-clock customer support to handle issues. Operators often compare this to a corner gas station charging more than a wholesale fuel distributor. It's the same basic product, but delivered through a small physical retail footprint instead of bulk infrastructure, and that convenience costs money to maintain. This is also why fees aren't uniform everywhere. Fees tend to run higher in busy, high-traffic locations or low liquidity areas, specifically because operators are paying rent or revenue share to the host business, plus local licenses, insurance, and cash handling logistics that scale with how much traffic the machine gets. Reason 3. You're not actually the customer comparison. You think you are. The instinct everyone has is to compare a Bitcoin ATM's fee against an online exchange's fee and conclude the ATM is a ripoff. But that comparison quietly skips over the one detail that matters most. A huge portion of Bitcoin ATM users literally cannot use an online exchange at all. Online exchanges require a verified bank account, something an estimated 24.6 million unbanked Americans simply don't have access to. Bitcoin ATMs operate entirely in cash, 24/7 in retail locations, with no banking prerequisite whatsoever, which is a fundamentally different cost structure to begin with. So the fairer comparison isn't Bitcoin ATM versus Coinbase. It's Bitcoin ATM versus the other cash-based financial services available to someone without a bank account. And on that comparison, the picture shifts. A regular bank ATM charging $3 on a $20 cash withdrawal, the national average, works out to a 15% effective transaction cost, which is genuinely comparable to a Bitcoin ATM's fee. Check cashing services and remittance companies like Western Union often land in similar territory once you account for their flat fees on smaller transactions. The Bitcoin ATM isn't uniquely predatory. It's just transparently pricing what cash-based financial access has always cost. Most people just never noticed because they had a debit card and skipped that part of the financial system entirely. Buying costs more than selling, and that's not an accident either. Research from the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City found a median purchase fee near 16%, while sell transactions commonly fall in the 8% to 12% range, where selling is even available. Why the gap? Operators' price inconvenience, Bitcoin's price volatility, and liquidity risk when selling Bitcoin to a customer. They're taking on more exposure handing you crypto for cash than they are handing you cash for crypto. Since most machines are buy-only and demand skews heavily toward people converting spare cash into Bitcoin rather than the reverse. The asymmetry in the fee reflects an asymmetry in the operator's actual risk, not an arbitrary decision to squeeze buyers harder for no reason. The fee. You don't see on the screen. Here's where things get genuinely murky, and where legitimate criticism of this industry actually lands. The posted percentage on the screen may not include the full exchange rate spread. Some operators bake an additional markup directly into the live rate they display, on top of the percentage fee you actually see. Many operators advertise a lower upfront fee, but quietly add other unseen fees on top of the transaction later. This is the legitimate version of the complaint people have about Bitcoin ATMs being a ripoff. Not that compliance and cash logistics are expensive, which they genuinely are, but that some operators obscure the true total cost behind a headline number that isn't the full story. The advice from operators trying to differentiate on transparency is consistent. Always compare the actual dollar amount of Bitcoin you receive against the live market price, rather than trusting the advertised percentage alone. Why states are stepping in? The fee structure isn't the only reason Bitcoin ATMs have drawn regulatory attention recently. It's compounded by who's actually using these machines and why. Bitcoin ATM fraud losses reported to the FBI hit $246.7 million in 2024 alone, a 99% increase from the year before. Adults over 60 were disproportionately targeted, accounting for more than 3 times the losses seen among younger adults, largely through government impersonation scams where scammers pose as IRS or Social Security officials demanding payment. That combination, high fees plus a vulnerable user base targeted by scammers, has pushed multiple states to act directly. Arizona set daily limits at $2,000 for new customers. Wisconsin capped all customers at $2,000 daily with mandatory fraud warnings. And Maine went furthest by directly capping Bitcoin ATM fees at 3% alongside a $1,000 daily limit. California maintains one of the strictest approaches nationally, with a $1,000 daily limit reflecting the state's broader caution toward cryptocurrency access. These caps exist specifically because regulators looked at the gap between a 3% online exchange fee and a 25% ATM fee, and decided that gap was wide enough, combined with fraud risk, to justify direct intervention. The real takeaway. A Bitcoin ATM fee looks outrageous next to an online exchange because you're comparing 2 genuinely different products wearing the same name. One requires a bank account, settles digitally, and operates at massive automated scale. The other accepts physical cash from anyone, runs a parallel compliance operation nearly identical to a bank's, pays for armored transport and machine maintenance in physical retail locations, and serves a population, the unbanked, the cash only, the people who walked past a dozen ATMs that wouldn't take them, that the online exchange was never built to serve in the first place. That doesn't mean every fee is fair, or that the industry is free of operators padding margins behind a confusing rate spread. Plenty of legitimate criticism exists about pricing transparency specifically. But the next time you see a 20% markup on a Bitcoin ATM and assume it's pure greed, remember what's actually sitting underneath that number. Compliance officers, armored cars, state licensing fees, and a margin that, on at least one operator's own published numbers, barely clears 1%.